We're getting there. I'm a bit bluer than I would like to be.
You're a bit blue.
I'm blue. Use a little light over here.
Oh,
There we go.
much better.
So we're live.
Cool. Deedle
It's a
deedle.
totally different scenario. Scenario.
Snarl.
Hey, this is what making a podcast is like, friends. I don't know. There's nobody on there. Nobody's watching, but and I just want to personally say, hey, Twitch, this is probably the last time we stream to you because you guys aren't doing nothing. Anywho,
Anyhow.
here we go. And I guess that's why they call it the blues. What's going on, everybody? This is the Cover Band Confidential Podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and side glass. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, Dan Ray.
I know that you guys think that this is just some silly thing that, but like I managed to catch Dan off guard on that one.
That was good. That was good.
I've been thinking about that one for like a week. I was like washing the dishes tonight, and I was like, I think this is what I'm gonna go with.
We were watching Jeopardy a couple of days ago, and like I can't remember what the question was, but the answer was like some kind of embarrassing pop culture reference, embarrassing to acknowledge that you know, and the form of question that the answer got put in was, why is it X? It was like, again, it was like, well, that is in the form of a question. We'll accept it.
That's fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of front of mind for me because we watched the Elton John, Bernie Taupin, Gershwin award deal that's on PBS. It is insanely good.
All right, cool.
I mean, it is exactly the kind of thing that you would expect. He's being honored, and all these artists come through and they do versions of his songs, and like the lineup is insane. It's Metallica and Joni Mitchell and Charlie Puth and Maren Morris, and like they all kind of do their thing. The guy that really, like, the artist that jumped out beyond hearing Joni Mitchell do "I'm Still Standing" with Brandi Carlile.
Wow.
Yeah, just kind of think about that.
Yeah.
And think about, like, what if that song was done in like a gypsy jazz format? That's what it was.
Whew.
But the standout at that show, so again, I just told you everybody who is on the lineup. Garth Brooks is on there too. But the guy who stole the show, the artist who stole the show, is a guy named Jacob Lusk.
Okay.
And most people in the US probably have never heard of him.
I haven't.
But he's in an act called Gabriel's, which is based in the UK. And he did Benny and the Jets, and it is one of the most compelling performances I have ever seen. End of sentence, no context.
Wow.
It is transcendent in a way that is very difficult to describe. But to consider the stakes of that show, the caliber of performer, and this guy who no one had ever heard of, absolutely just dominated, mopped the floors with all of them.
Awesome.
It was truly impressive. Guy's got a range like you've never heard. And he's singing, first off, he's singing Benny and the Jets probably a whole step higher than the record. So it's not Benny, it's a Benny. Like, it's up in the stratosphere. It's awesome.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, go check that out. It's on, that performance is on YouTube. Some select performances are on YouTube, but the whole thing's fantastic. I sobbed through most of it.
That's great.
Sobbing aside, how are you doing, man?
I've done some sobbing myself tonight. It was my 10-year-old's first voice lesson recital. And yes, it was adorable and wonderful, and she's her instrument is blooming. It's phenomenal. It's incredible to hear. Yeah. And then a bunch of other kids who take lessons with that same group who were, either kind of starters with her or been in it for years and years and were really amazing. So it was as much as anyone can enjoy going to a kid recital when there's going to be a bunch of other kid performances, it was actually a really good show. So
yeah, that's always, it's tough. I know that we both put our parents through it in that situation.
Yep.
And it's also like the thing about like kid stuff specifically is that ultimately you want them to sound like kids because they're the quote unquote phenoms, whatever, that are doing stuff to make their voice sound older than it is. That's not good.
No.
You shouldn't do that. So it's that's great though. Maybe a little passion is being discovered, and it's
Well,
those are all magical
and I'll
things.
tell you, the last kid who sang, he got up and he was 14 and he looked 14 and he opened
Hmm.
his mouth and it was Stars, the Javert solo song from Les Mis.
I've done it at a recital
Okay,
around that
he
age.
did it in full baritone, full power,
Hmm.
acted it. It was like goosebumps. It was amazing.
It's
And
great.
just a moment of like, here's this kind of squirmy kid, and then this massive baritone voice came out of him. It was like, ah, so good.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's see. Did you gig this weekend?
I did not gig this weekend. I sat around on my butt this weekend.
That's
It
great.
was fantastic. Yeah,
I love that for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Well, I did.
Ooh, let's hear it.
So, as we last left you, there was going to be rehearsal on Thursday. That rehearsal did happen, and it was chaotic,
Hmm.
is the best way that I can describe it. Instead of coming in with a game plan, it was pretty much like I was just throwing out audibles left and right. Let's think about this one. Let's think about that one. We did end up bringing in Mr. Brightside, which is it's in there. It's going to be something that we pull out, you know,
Yeah.
at other shows. So that was a total home run. But a weird thing happened. Well, a bunch of weird things happened actually. Um, the first thing was actually, let me circle back. Eggplant. So in the rehearsal, there was a big breakthrough, something that I figured out that I think is going to be big news for anybody who is interested in that Maestro DMX unit. I did want to note that I am working on the review, but as of right now, they are out of stock. So it didn't seem to be a good idea to release a video about a product that no one can buy. So I'm going to hold off on that for right now. But just note that the discount code that we sent out is still good whenever they do get back in stock. But I want to just throw that out there. We figured out a way. Well, I figured out a couple of things. First off, I figured out how to do the MIDI mapping so that I could push buttons to make it do certain things. So I have this little Akai LPD controller that literally it was sitting in like my closet. It hasn't is seen no combat in recent memory.
Yeah.
So much so that I went to go figure out what the mapping looked like, and there's not a driver software for this anymore
Oh,
because it's like 12 years old.
right.
Um, but because the internet is undefeated, there was some guy who was like, I figured out that it uses this particular programming language, and now I set up this website that you can open this up in Google Chrome and program it from your web browser.
Ah,
So that's what I did, and
love the internet.
it worked great. But the big thing was, I think I cracked what you need to be feeding this thing.
Hmm. Audio
And
wise.
after, yes, because for those of you who don't know, the Maestro DMX is set up and it listens to the music and then generates DMX commands to make your light show do whatever it's going to do. So I tried it through a couple of different things. I tried a version of the main output. I tried certain instruments muted, but because it just kind of needs to work on show days, I just started feeding it our drummer's mix, and I think that's it. I think that's the answer
Cool.
because the unit is looking for tempo and it's picking it up through the kick drum. So obviously your drummer's mix is going to have that louder than anybody else's, but it also really likes the click track. So both of those things kind of lined up, and we ran it through rehearsal, and it was just ridiculously good,
Hmm.
even better than what I've seen it do with pre-recorded music.
That's great.
And it got me super excited. And it turns out our guitar player Joey's like, hey, I know that you have these two, but I think I got like, I don't know, like 10 more. I was like, I'm sorry, what? Because these pixel lights are unreal.
Yeah, and you
The
can
stuff that they can
there's
do.
brackets to grid them, right? You can stack them on
Uh-huh.
top of each other and make a 2x2 display of it.
Absolutely. And man, that just got my my creative juices running hard, trying to think about all the things that I could do.
Super cool.
The idea of maybe, because we're an 80s band, the idea of that you could do like 8-bit, like little Pac-Man graphics on either.
Yes.
Guess we'll have to see how many of those I can stack together.
Yeah.
All right, but let's talk about the gig itself. The gig that happened on Saturday.
Right.
It was a very interesting situation. I shared this with the folks in the Patreon Slack, and if you follow me on TikTok, but it was a backyard party it was a crawfish boil, this thing that they've done 4 or 5 years in a row. And the setup was interesting because there was a deck off of the main floor of the house, and then there was a concrete slab poured underneath. But everybody was going to be down in that area, and that's also kind of where like the kegs and the grill and stuff were. So it didn't really make sense for us to be down there, but it also didn't make sense for us to be fully set up on the deck, because our PA would be not pointed at the right people. So
Yeah.
this was a situation where the band was on the deck and the PA was on the ground.
Like a floor down.
Yes, one floor down.
Yeah.
And we we ended up fishing all of the cables down. There was a swing underneath the deck, and so we just kind of like linked all of the cables to the chain that was coming off of the swing. And that was the way that we fed all of the IO to front of house. It was another gig where we used the Phoenix wireless mics.
Yeah.
Flawless.
Great.
Sounded great.
Yeah.
The only like issue we had was I went to go plug in my in-ears and I could hear nothing out of my right ear.
Ooh.
And so I start going through all the troubleshooting steps, and it's like, okay, well, let's check the seating of the cable. No, that seems to be fine. Does anybody else have a cable like this? And somebody did, and I plugged my right ear into it and it worked. And I was like, all right, well, the cable's dead.
Yep.
So ordered that today. And have you looked at aftermarket or replacement cables for your in-ears?
No.
The price range on these things is really something. Because the standard one that I used before that I'm going to replace was, I think, $40 plus shipping. But they have different options that go as expensive as $300 just for the cable.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of snake oil in cables.
But I'm not saying like on the internet. I'm saying from the manufacturer.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, they're not exempt from snake oil.
You know, it's the Monster Cable versus Hanger argument.
Right.
So I opted to go with the cheapest one.
Well,
and I bought those ears. It was like 26. Yeah, it's been like 8 years or something. So, it hung in there. I feel no shame.
Oh yeah, you got your mileage out of it
for sure. So that was kind of a bummer, but because the layout was weird, popping an ear out wasn't a big deal because it wasn't super loud, and everything went fine. And it was one of those rare occasions where I was fed, paid, and home before 7 p.m.
That. So good.
That's great.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was a lot of fun, and I think we definitely hit the benchmark of the most chaotic set list I've ever done, because there was just a really wide swath of people. We just didn't really know what to play. So instead of like putting a set list together, and again, this is very much not me. And if anybody who has been following this show for any length of time, I just put 4 hours of music into a band helper set, and we're just like, we'll just call audibles for all of them.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And we did everything from You Never Even Call Me By My Name by David Allan Coe to Higher by Creed. And I hate to say it, but I think Higher by Creed is like, it's going in the set.
It's a keeper, huh?
It is currently crushing.
All right.
But I've got a confession to make. I don't know the words to that song. I knew them at some point, and I know like there's certain bits and pieces that I kind of know, but I uh I basically just yellow Ledbettered my way through the song.
Yeah.
And I don't know if yellow Ledbettering is a verb, but I think it should be. So if this is another example of Elder Statesman where I will something into existence, uh, from here on out, if you don't know the words to a song and you just kind of mumble your way through it, that is now referred to as yellow
Yellow
Ledbettering.
Ledbettering. I like it.
Because I have played that song for 20 years at this point. I've never learned the words.
Right. Well,
It's
I'm
just,
not sure there are any.
I mean, at some point they're probably like, if you look them up, like there are words to it.
I
I've never
guess.
used them though.
No, yeah.
Speaking of things we never use, let's go to reviews. Actually, that's not fair,
No.
especially this week.
Yeah.
So this is not something that happened on any of our social platforms or on Apple Podcasts, wherever. This was a DM that Dan and I got this morning from a guy named Chris Braz, who is a part of our Patreon community. And I'm not going to get into the details, but what he said and kind of what this show has been for him in this particular season of life was really impactful. And you know, we talk a lot about the here's why we do things, and this was just one of those messages that was a good reminder of, you know, something that we kind of think about as entertainment and just kind of a distraction for our day-to-day does have a very big impact for other people outside of our purview. So
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
big thanks to Chris for sharing what he shared, and yeah, it was great.
Yep. We're leaving it just
So
deliberately vague because it's not our story to tell, but
yep,
we love that we were a part of, well, that the show was meaningful in the way that it was.
yep, and we'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
So this week's topic is, now we're gonna shift gears. I don't think there's any more housekeeping or
No,
anything like that.
I don't
So
have any.
we'll go from first to third. Let's go. So this is another message that came in through the website form. This was from a guy named Justin, and it was a lot of stuff, and it was kind of in reference to the should you quit your band kind of eggplant. The subject of the message was in response to the should you quit your band episode that we put out a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
And it contained a lot of personal details. Again, we're going to be intentionally vague. And I just want to kind of throw it out that some of the stuff in that message is very much outside of our purview. And, you know, it's always important that when things are going on in your personal life, you might want to seek professional help for things when it seems like bigger things are going on.
Yeah. I'll
But
just point out one thing just as a personal response to
yep,
Justin. The insight that the tension might be coming from you is an insight I've had before in bands,
oh, for sure.
and it's a you know, it's a piece of self-awareness that's really great to note. And so you know, that gives you the opportunity to either you know, continue to be that problem now that you know you are, or do something about it. And so
Yeah.
you know, I leave that in your hands.
Yeah. Uh, but there's two main parts of his message that I think are really great topics to dig into. So, kind of alluding to what Dan was talking about, there's some stuff going on with his group. He's not sure he wants to stick it out, but there's also some realization that it might not be the band that is causing me to feel the way that I feel, and that there's some other stuff going on. But the main questions are here. As professional musicians with families and lives, how do you juggle your passion versus your obligation and not lose the love for the music you're creating? I'm not talking about finding joy in eggplant. I'm not talking about finding joy in what a song does to a room necessarily. How do you still use music as an outlet when your entire job requires you to play music? I'm not doing this for a living, but there has to be a way to crack the code between work and play so I can remain in the band and not feel like I'm forced to be there. I know this is long. Hope you guys are great. Keep rocking. So big thanks to Justin for
Yeah.
reaching out.
Yep.
And that's, man, this is one of those questions that I don't know if either one of us have a solid handle on it.
Well, yeah,
all the time.
and it's two questions, right? So let's take them separately. The first is about
Yep.
work life balance, and I certainly have not cracked that one. I will say that the times that it has worked have been times when I've been paying attention to communication and putting my schedule on a calendar where my family can see it, and not surprising them with stuff. The times when I've not been rigorous about that and have been like, "Hey, I got a gig on Saturday," and they're like, "What?" Um, Less good.
Yep.
Um,
For sure.
and there was a time when we were booked, gosh, sometimes four weekends a month.
Hmm.
And it got to where we just had to say that was a lot, and we had to back it down because we do have jobs and families and lives, and so you got to find the balance in actually how much band work you can do, and not A, wear yourself out, run yourself into the ground, and B, that you're still available for the other people in your life that need you.
Yeah. And ultimately, for me, it's trying to figure out how often does this need to happen where it still feels like fun.
Yeah.
And there's not like there's not an answer to that.
Right.
It's all relative.
Yeah. And
You know,
personal. Yeah.
yeah, totally. So there, like this month we're looking at, I think currently 3 confirmed shows. Next month is about the same. But up to this point, gigging has been a bit sparse, and it is currently at a frequency where I am looking forward to these
Yeah.
gigs as they come up, and not necessarily dreading them. Uh, and I'm also looking at my current operation to figure out ways of reducing friction. And currently, that revolves around like systematic stuff. Like one thing that I really need to figure out is a way to take my current front of house in-ear monitor rig, which is in a 16 rack unit rolling monstrosity,
Yeah.
and break it up into something that is in 2 different pieces that I can easily pick up by myself.
Hmm.
Like that's the main thing, is that one piece of gear is the only thing that I can't navigate without another person.
Yeah.
And it's not always ideal for that. And so I want to be able to put it into 2 separate racks. I think I've got the solution figured out on how to connect them and all of that stuff. And that's going to be a project I hope to get finished by the end of the summer. As more work's coming in, I have a little
Yeah.
discretionary income for that kind of process. And of course, anything that I decommission can be, sold to recoup the expenses on that
For sure.
project as well. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately that's what it is. It's a matter of finding ways to make sure that it's fun. And there can be a lot of factors there. But ultimately, I think Dan made a great point with it's got a lot to do with communication with the people in your orbit, because ultimately they're the people you answer to. And if that's a point of stress, communication is the thing that is going to soften that situation.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. And not just family, by the way. When I got hired into my current job, I had a standing weekly acoustic gig on Tuesday nights that started while, technically the company I was working for was in California. And so technically I was starting to, this gig's, downbeat was before the end of business hours.
Yeah.
And I told my boss in the interview, like, look, Tuesday nights Eastern time, I'm booked, won't be available. And she went way out of her way to make sure like nothing was going to be there would be no demands on me at that time, and I'd always be free for it. But again, that only happened because I wasn't shy about saying, look, here's the reality of this thing that I care about and I do in my life, and I have these commitments to it. And so, it's everybody. It's not just keep the wife happy. It's keep everybody happy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then I think the other big chunk of it is how does this become a creative outlet and not feel like a job?
Yeah. Yeah. I knew a guy who was really into model trains, had a whole big
Mm-hmm.
room in his house for it, and, loved it. Was big committed to it. And then he opened a business around sourcing model train parts for other hobbyists. And it was a grind and a misery, and it killed his love for trains within about 6 months. So there really is something about, this passion that I have when I turn it into a business. Well, suddenly there are new demands on it, new demands on
Hmm.
me, obligations that I gotta fulfill, and there's a P&L at the end of the day that I gotta satisfy. Um, and that's never been, by definition, that's not part of a hobby. So I'm like, I have a lot of freedom in that part. I can just spend as much money as I want on it. So the question is like, how do I have this be my whole gig and still love the music of it? And I've never been a full timer, but you have.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
And I will say that I don't know if I necessarily dreaded playing when I was full time, but it definitely put a different level of pressure
Hmm.
on those gigs because they needed to be successful in a way that didn't necessarily align with any other, I guess, KPIs. I don't know if as far as like a good terminology, like a gig was successful if tips were good, but it didn't matter if I was in the right headspace or any of the other things that happened
Yeah.
or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so the the situation with that is tough because it forces you to make decisions that you wouldn't normally make if money weren't an object. But even as a hobby, we always we want to go with the four main things. If you can get two or three of the four things, it's worth your time and effort. So I would say think about the things that really matter to you. And again, I'm such a fan of writing things down. I think it's because my brain doesn't work right, and like staring at it makes it make sense. But having like clear ideas of what you enjoy about playing your instrument in whatever capacity it is, and see if the current situation works for you in that context, and if it doesn't, what a gig that would work for you in that context would look like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. Yeah. And it's perfectly okay to have deal breakers.
Sure.
And nobody really gets to judge anybody else for their deal breakers.
Hmm.
If really for you playing Don't Stop Believin', like you just flat won't. All right, there are bands out there that don't. Not a problem.
Yeah. But I mean, the other thought that came in when we were kind of working through this is that maybe it's just like it's not a gigging band.
Yeah.
Maybe it's showing up to jams every couple of days or
Yeah.
once a week or every other week where it kind of scratches that itch. When I moved back to Atlanta from Nashville, I started going to that Meddlesome Live Band karaoke
Yeah.
because it's I didn't know anybody. I didn't have connections in that city, in that area, that particular, world. And so it was one, a good place to meet people. And it was also, again, a way to kind of scratch that itch to get it out of my system. But it ultimately served both of those things because it helped me meet people and it helped me get gigs because it was a way for somebody could see what I was able to do, and then we could move on from there. So it was a good source for a lot of opportunities, but it is important to figure out what is the thing that you like about this, you know?
Yeah.
And for some people, performing is everything.
Yep.
Like you being specifically you, Dan, being kind of an outgoing person, it is a thing that really feeds you.
Yes.
And for other folks like myself, it demands a lot of me.
Right.
And it's kind of draining. It's kind of the opposite effect. But I enjoy it for the challenge of it, and I enjoy it for the interaction, even though it's not necessarily my default mode. I do like that exchange. Uh, and I like the idea of being able to try stuff and, play songs I'd never played before. And like, those are the kinds of things that work for me. And it doesn't, like, you don't always get all of those things, but finding the right balance of the stuff that you want out of whatever it is you're doing is paramount.
Yeah.
And it could be that maybe being in a band isn't it. Maybe you would rather just sit at home and play over tracks or write your own music. Or, I mean, it seems like that's kind of what it is. There's a creativity drought.
Yeah.
It's not being fed
Yeah.
in what he's currently doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know.
Well, maybe eggplant that.
Yeah.
The thing is, a creative career is itself a choice,
Mhm.
right? Nobody's playing guitar because they have no other options, right? There are people, waiting tables because that's the only thing they can do or something. I don't even know about that. There are people working jobs that is like the only choice they have. Nobody's being a musician because that's their only choice. You have to deliberately want that. You have to be headed into that. You got to actively make that happen. And so
You also kind of have to be like deranged to a
yes,
degree.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is not. Yeah, for normal people.
Yeah.
But this question, like, how can I can remain in the band and not feel like I'm forced to be there? And nobody's forcing you to be there.
Yeah.
You're in this whole thing because you chose that. And so what is it about it that you chose, and how can you get more of that and less of not that? And that's the only conversation to have.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about the only reason you should ever be a professional musician full time is if you cannot possibly imagine yourself doing anything else. But even for those people, actually doing that instead of, most creatives are also doing something else to make money because they have to, not, so the point is, if it is going to be a thing that you're going to put yourself into and push yourself toward, there's a reason for that. And so that gives you some input into what part of it feeds you and what part of it doesn't.
So you brought up a really interesting point talking about what it is that you need in order to be a professional musician. And I love playing my instrument more than I enjoy adulation necessarily. No, let me rephrase that. Eggplant. So you bring up a really interesting point talking about the things that it takes to be a professional musician. And what I kind of landed on is, do you love playing your instrument so much that you would do it for other people? Where your creative output isn't necessarily the thing that is being requested. Can you take yourself out of that situation?
Yeah.
Because that is what that takes. And if that's not for you, no fault whatsoever. That's totally relatable.
Totally.
Like, not a problem.
Yep.
But as far as creative outlet and music, I think for me, it's just finding other outlets for it, because creativity does not live in a box. It's everywhere, and it can be used in everything that you do. I, in my 20s, was very much locked in on the idea that I had to make music. It was the thing that fulfilled me creatively. But it was also a thing that I didn't always like sharing and wasn't necessarily for other people. And so when my whole original band stardom path kind of fell apart, I found other avenues for it. And some of that was I started writing. I would just go into Logic and I would just like spend 30, 40 minutes like, all right, let's see what comes out of this. And I kind of started piling up all of these, I don't know, 30-second, 45-second, 8-bar, 16-bar, 32-bar sound beds.
Yeah.
And it also became apparent that like people could use that kind of stuff. And so I actually started I started composing for like film and commercial work, just because in the office that Amber worked at, there was a video production company, and they were looking for those kinds of things. And this was before Jingle Punks, was a thing where you could literally just buy a subscription and have unlimited resources like that. But it was a creative outlet, and it was a thing that wasn't necessarily externally validating, but it was at the time lucrative and a way to kind of work through that. This podcast has been a creative outlet.
Yeah.
Getting into video work has been a creative outlet. Uh, there's so many things that you can use to flex that muscle that may not necessarily involve what you think has to be the thing that you use to express your creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, actually, the thing about creativity is if you already know it, it's not creativity.
Yep.
Right.
It's creating something out of nothing.
Yeah.
It's like,
And you know you've been creative when you go, oh,
hmm.
look at that.
Honestly, like right now, the thing that does that for me is graphic design.
Cool.
Because like sometimes I make the thumbnails for all of the episodes, and sometimes you throw some together and it's quick. But other times, like, oh, I want to do that thing where you're like, it kind of looks like this, whatever,
Mhm.
and then you have to go and Google it and figure out how to make that happen. And all the tutorials are in Photoshop, and you don't have Photoshop, you're using Pixelmator, and so you have to figure out the like parallel of that in their menu commands and stuff. And like I have a lot of fun just making logos and goofing off in there. And I think that's okay. I think as you go through life and mature and experience new things, like that can change. And I think that's the hardest thing. I think it's just being willing to admit that this thing that worked for me isn't working for me anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's tough.
Yeah.
It's just kind of getting over it, or mourning or whatever.
Well, it's the
Like,
comfort. It's the comfort of the known, and it is absolutely the enemy of creativity.
totally. So in your particular situation, Justin, I think this is probably threefold, because got to get some we need to figure out what's going on outside of the context of the band that's causing stress and things. Get that sorted. I think that's ultimately the first thing, and it could potentially solve the other two.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, figure out a way, write down the things that you need out of a project in order to feel fulfilled, and see how many of those work in your current situation. And if they don't work, leave. You aren't being forced to be there.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you are. And also, don't be upset if you don't crack the code, because we've been doing this for a long time and we haven't figured it out either.
Yeah.
What typically happens, and this is, again, I feel like this is another kind of thing with creative work, it's just it ebbs and flows.
Right.
There's going to be times when you're really invested in the work and it means so much to you, and you feel like you're operating at such a high level. And there's other times where it's just like, I'm hitting a wall. I'm never going to get out of this. Nothing has ever been as bad as this is right now. But the funny thing is that, like, in our situation, as band leaders and, business owners or whatever, I feel like every year around November is the time where I start texting Dan. Is like, I think I'll just put all this up on Facebook Marketplace and just, call it a day.
Yeah.
It's seasonal. It just happens when, the year kind of wraps up and you look back at things and you're like, there's a lot of stressful things, and I don't know if I'd want to carry this over. But I also know, because it's happened so frequently, that it's just like, okay, this is just a thing that happens and it'll pass, and I'll be right back to it. Because, like, I played a really silly show on Saturday and it was all fun.
Yeah.
No stress.
Right.
And it was great. Like, the worst thing that happened to me at that gig is that I was wearing a shirt that was referencing the Adventures of Pete and Pete, and none of the people at the party knew who Pete and Pete were. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything else was great.
It's not that didn't hurt, I'm sure, but
yeah, I was like, oh, so yeah, I am old. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I was like, Iggy Pop was on it. They're like, who? I was like, oh my God.
Oh, no.
I can't do this. So, Justin, I hope that helps, man. Like, figure out what works for you in kind of being pragmatic in the reality of a situation. Is just think about what the next right thing for you to do is.
There you go.
That's like my mantra. Like anytime I have found myself in a situation where it's like, man, I really stepped in it and I don't know how to like fix the whole thing. The one thing I can decide is what's the next right thing to do.
Right.
It typically is the least painful of all of the like painful choices, but it does get the ball rolling. So hope that helps.
Yep.
If you have any questions that you would like us to dig into, let us know, coverbandconfidential@gmail.com, or fill out the form. You can just go to coverbandconfidential.com and hit the contact button. That has been a like very big source of
Yeah.
our stuff recently. So appreciate all of you guys reaching out. Next week, things should hopefully be less vague.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of weeks of vagary. But it's also important to note that we really appreciate you guys and we don't want to do anything or share anything that would make anybody feel, singled out or whatever. Like we want to make sure that like you guys feel safe confiding in us,
Yeah.
and that we can be a resource and a path forward for you guys.
And at the same time, we are aware that we're broadcasting here. This is not like a podcast to this one dude, right? Hopefully there were nuggets in there that may be useful for a lot of people in a lot of situations. So,
yep. All right, folks. Well, if you want to support the show, you can do any of the things that Mike's about to tell you, but we'll just go ahead and call it for this week. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
in Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
You've been listening to the Covering Confidential podcast for the week of June 7th, 2024.